to our third seminar in the series, the MSc Life Sciences Ayurveda Biology webinar series. This series has been crafted for individuals to learn more about what is Ayurveda biology, because as a discipline, it doesn't really exist in the minds of many people who are looking at options and courses post their bachelor's degree. So in this webinar, I will first start out by a brief introduction to TDU as well as the program. After the short introduction, I will invite Vaidya Rammanohar to share his remarks on what he believes Ayurveda biology is. And then we will have a Q&A session. This webinar series is meant to be interactive, so please put down your questions in the Q&A, and we will try to make sure that they are addressed. This is a gathering of people who are curious about Ayurveda biology, and so we encourage any questions that come to your mind. I'll just start briefly with a presentation about TDU. The University of Transdisciplinary Health Sciences and Technology, that is the full form of our university, TDU. We are located in Bangalore, and we are a very small private university. Our genesis happened in an NGO called the Foundation for the Revitalization of Local Health Tradition, FRLHT. Some of you might be aware, this is an NGO that is very active in the area of medicinal plants, conservation, and documentation of traditional knowledge. From this NGO, two institutions have come forth. One of them is our university, and the other one is a hospital, the Institute for Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine, which is located just across from our campus. Unlike typical big universities, we are a very niche university, occupying very small areas as far as university science is concerned. We have centers in ethno-veterinary medicine, ethnobotany, conservation, and the center that your host today, myself, Megha, and Dr. Vishnu Prasad present here, the Center for Ayurveda Biology and Holistic Nutrition. We are a small group of individuals passionate about bringing together various different knowledge systems under the ambit of Ayurveda biology. And we have instituted a program to train people to appreciate this area as well. Now, the degree program we are offering is called MSc Life Sciences, Ayurveda Biology. Now, it might be perplexing to many of you, why have we chosen a title that has two big words in it, or two big concepts, life sciences and Ayurveda biology? Well, we believe epistemologically, Ayurveda is nothing but the study of life. And although in some sense, today we recognize Ayurveda as only being the study of human life, in fact, it is much broader than that. And it encompasses a whole area of traditional medicine and traditional knowledge and health practices that are practiced in this country. In its codified form, it is called Ayurveda. And life sciences, as you know, covers the entire spectrum of biology and the science of life, whether it's an earthworm or a human being. And both of these sciences, Ayurveda as well as life science, aim to look at the changes that happen in nature. It is just that the terminology and words described to record these changes are very different between the two knowledge streams. We believe that terminologies are a vocabulary issue, but in depth, they both are trying to understand the world around us and make it a better place for you and for me. This program is a 2-year full-time postgraduate program. We invite students from all streams of Ayush, Ayurveda, Yoga, Unani, Siddha, as well as homeopathy. And we include those of you who have completed a bachelor's in biology or chemistry. And that by that we mean any branch of biology or chemistry. It could be biotechnology, zoology, botany. We are very particular that we have a very wide range of students in our program because we believe that in this program, students will learn not just from the teachers, but from each other as well. And already in our first year, we are seeing this. We have 14 students right now, and about roughly half of the class comes from an Ayurveda background, while the other half comes from a BSc background. And teaching this class is phenomenal because we can see that the students are learning just by talking to each other. This course consists of 4 semesters, and I will just briefly tell you about what we do in these semesters. More details are on our website, and I have provided the link there. In the first semester, we cover subjects such as biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, as well as fundamentals of Ayurveda. Our goal is not to make these individuals Ayurveda physicians. Our goal is to inculcate a sense of the fundamentals and the terminologies, as well as the literature that describes Ayurveda. In addition, there are subjects such as local health tradition and ecology. These are complemented by practicals. TDU has always believed that experiential hands-on learning is very important. And so the morning half is theory, whereas the afternoon half is lectures and library hours. Sorry, practicals and library hours. The second semester continues in this train where students are exposed to both life science subjects as well as Ayurveda subjects such as pharmacognosy. Right now, Dr. Vishnu Prasad is leading a course called Integrative Immunology, where he, who is trained in cell biology, does a jugalbandi with a Vaidya taking immunology classes. So they talk about Vyadhi Kshamatvatva as well as T cells and B cells. And this way we hope our students will really appreciate both these domains. In semester 3 of year 2, we have research methodology, One Health, and the option to take any electives. And because we are a transdisciplinary university, we don't restrict the electives to any particular science, biology, or chemistry. It can be from any area that the student is interested in, including the arts, cinema, dancing. And this semester, students will also start their 1-year dissertation project, which can be done in-house with the faculty or can be done externally. And it can also be combined with clinical practice. So for many of our Ayurveda students, we are encouraging them to work with clinicians, but do a dissertation project that has a research angle to it. The last semester is completely given over to a project. And so with that, we hope that our students go through the cycle from knowledge to practice. What are the potentials of doing such a degree? We think that students can become innovators in many different areas in their practice, so medicine, in their science, if they wish to do research and development, as innovators, as we heard in our last webinar from Dr. D.B. Narayanan, the wellness industry requires individuals who understand both traditional medicine as well as modern science. And so a combination, we think, offers students an opportunity to take the old along with the new, and we think it can really help with the discovery of new biology. With that, I'd like to come to the speaker for this webinar, Vaidya Rammanohar. Dr. Manohar is a BMS degree holder from the Ayurveda College at Coimbatore, and he's an MD in Dravya Guna. He's had a long career, both as a teacher as well as a researcher. I was also pleasantly surprised that he started off his career at FRLHT, our little NGO trust. Dr. Ram Manohar has been doing both since the early 90s, and his interests are in teaching as well as in the documentation of various Ayurveda treatises. He has now forged ahead and is leading the Ayur portal, which is an ambitious program to develop digital learning material for Ayurveda clinicians. In terms of research, he has worked in many different areas, including rheumatoid arthritis and muscular dystrophy. He has many awards to his name, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing this right, but the latest was the Bhishak Bhushanam Puraskaram that was conferred by the Vagabhatta Sarani in 2021. Today, we will like to begin our discussion with Vaidya Rammanohar on a paper that he was an author on, and it's a landmark paper. And the reason is that it's one of the few attempts that have been made to do a randomized controlled trial. Physicians and those in medicine will be aware that the RCT is considered to be the gold standard for evaluating the efficacy of a medical intervention. And often we hear that this is not possible in Ayurveda because it is a personalized form of medicine. Well, for those of you who are not aware of this paper, here a group of physicians and scientists come up with a protocol to test if Ayurveda-based treatment, as well as methotrexate, which is the reductionist drug provided in the other stream of medicine, where they compared the efficacy of these two treatments, and they found, and I'll just quote right from the paper, all three treatments were approximately equivalent in efficacy. So what were these three treatments and how did they overcome the issue of personalization in Ayurveda? They had three groups. The first one got drugs and Ayurveda placebo. Now, those of you with Ayurveda background will be probably looking at this in amazement. A placebo? How can you give a placebo in Ayurveda? Especially when it has 5 or 6 different treatments. Is there a sham panchakarma treatment that is possible? The second group got drug placebo, which is easy to understand because you merely replace one pill with another, and Ayurveda treatment. Whereas the third group got both the drug as well as the Ayurveda treatment. I will stop here and I will now ask Professor Ram Manohar to share his thoughts both on this paper and on his long journey as a teacher as well as a researcher. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mika, for that introduction. And it's fascinating to know about this new initiative for Ayurveda Biology, especially the course, for students aspiring to enter into this realm. Now, coming to our RA study, I must also mention that this was the vision of my mentor, Sri Padma Shri P.R. Krishna Kumarji. And there is also history behind the study. So I want to mention that sometimes doing serious research in Ayurveda is what we call as a Bhagirath Prayatna, of across generations. So it was in 1970s with the WHO that the first study on rheumatoid arthritis and Ayurveda was done at AVP Coimbatore when I was myself a student there. So at that time, I thought this is relevant because at that time, that study, although it brought out interesting results, it never got published because there was a difficulty of communication between modern Western doctors and Ayurveda physicians. Ayurveda physicians used complex treatments. And even though the outcomes were interesting, the doctors couldn't make out what was happening because every patient was given slightly different treatments. And so they said that we couldn't find any single medicine which is actually effective for rheumatoid arthritis. So that was a pity. But that, data remained dormant. And when I joined again AVP as a researcher, a research scientist from the US had come there at that time, and she looked up all this data and found this to be very interesting. And she said that, why can't we do a study, this time really looking at Ayurveda in all its complexity. We will have doctors from the US who will be interested. And this is how, and at that time, NIH, the National Institutes of Health, had, announced a call for a research grant to especially look at the complexity of traditional medicine. So timing was perfect, and we applied on the basis of this WHO data. So why I wanted to say is one of the reasons why in Ayurveda research is not progressing, I think, is because although RCTs are really the golden standard, I mean, it's not always relevant for Ayurveda. Another thing is, if you want to really plan an RCT, I think it can be only done in limited areas where we want to showcase that Ayurveda is really strong. But this is not something that can be replicated to all the Ayurvedic interventions that we have. And if we're going to wait for that, we will never complete this work. But it is very good as a proof of concept and initiating a dialogue. And why RCTs are not getting successful today is that we jump directly into an RCT. We have to do a lot of preparatory work first. We must know how our practice is happening, because in preclinical work for modern medicine is our clinical work. Actually, what we are doing in our clinic, that is our background foundational data. Based on that, we are planning an RCT to showcase to another group of people or scientific community that Ayurveda can also be assessed. That is the whole purpose of this activity. It's not really to generate first-hand information that Ayurveda is working, because that as clinicians we know, we are experiencing it, we just need to document it. And this is mainly for communication. So to cut a long story short, this RCT worked because we had this prior data. We had the data from the WHO study, which gave us very good indicators of how we should plan an RCT. So that I would like to highlight. If we don't do this groundwork, what kind of combinations, what kind of treatments, how long does it work? And the main thing was, when you want to go into an RCT and a double-blind randomized control trial, it was an experiment to see if we can bring the rigor of modern science and the holism of Ayurveda together, satisfying both sides. So I wouldn't say it was a perfect thing, because now in AVP, the second phase is already started through a learning. So we hope this will bring more info. But this was very important in that feasibility, that it is possible on the one side to have a rigorous scientific design and still use the holistic framework of Ayurveda. That was what made this very unique and interesting. And since you asked about this individualization, that was the key. In an RCT trial, you are supposed to give one medicine from the beginning to the end of the trial. And actually, we are studying a drug. RCT is designed for pharma companies to develop new drugs and sell it. So the whole, the framework is to take a drug, target it against a disease. It's also very commercially influenced. I wouldn't say that RCT design is only science inspired. It is also commerce inspired, because that's the way we make and market and sell medicines. But in Ayurveda, our challenge was that we had to individualize the treatment and also modify the treatment according to the response from the patient. So such an RCT was never done before. And Dr. Daniel First, whose brilliant idea this was, that we can tweak the RCT design to accommodate this, peculiarity or this unique approach of Ayurveda, was actually the key thing. That this is sometimes also referred to as a black box design, where we look at Ayurveda as a complete treatment. We don't break it down into parts. So you are able to allow the physician to individualize the treatment and also to change the treatment if necessary based on the response that they get from the patient. So this kind of a study was never done before. So that is, and another important key thing is, we knew that if we were to give what we call in Ayurveda Shamana Chikitsa, what protocol we should follow, how long it will take. And that was very, very critical. For rheumatoid arthritis, usually the duration is 6 months. If we want to produce a result with Ayurveda that can match methotrexate, then we would need Panchakarma also. If you want to do it in 6 months. But, you already asked that creating a sham Panchakarma treatment is very challenging. You cannot have a sham placebo for Panchakarma. So we had to, because it was the first time we were exploring an RCT, we had to restrict ourselves to Shamana treatment. And which means that, we needed a longer duration. And so we insisted from the Ayurvedic side that we need a 9-month duration trial. And because of that decision, the results became interesting. If we had agreed, this is something which usually happens. We don't have the background data. We just try to force fit Ayurveda into. So most other Ayurveda trials on rheumatoid arthritis have been 6 months long, not 9 months. And actually, when we did our study, the most important statistical difference was between 6 months and 9 months. There was a huge statistical difference. At 6 months, Ayurvedic treatment had only 20% improvement according to ACR criteria, and no respondents for 70% improvement. So if our study had stopped at 6 months, we would have ended up saying that Ayurveda has very modest efficacy in rheumatoid arthritis. But at the end of 9 months, the maximum respondents for 70% improvement was in the Ayurveda group. So everything happened, between 6 and 9 months. And this we could factor into the study because of the prior data that we. Yeah, so I think I've been talking at length. So maybe if there's any question or I can talk any other aspect of the study. Of course, the placebo is also there, which you had highlighted.
Yes, that was not I would like very much to comment on that.
The placebos, right? Yes. Yeah. So the whole idea was that, we have to blind a patient. In Ayurveda, randomization and blinding was never considered in our older tradition because of this challenge of individualization. When I'm individualizing a patient and I'm looking according to Ayurveda Avastha, because when I give a treatment, what is the response from the patient? Based on that, I even confirm my diagnosis. This is called upashema and anupashema. So if I blind myself, then I cannot treat. So blinding is not possible actually in Ayurvedic clinical practice, because I need to get the response from the patient. I need to modify my treatment according to the response. If I give a placebo and it doesn't work, then I already know. I cannot wait till 9 months to know which group received the placebo or which group received the real medicine. So this was our biggest challenge. And I can tell you, even that concept of a placebo was possible only because we had 3 groups where all of them received some active treatment or the other. So the group which received Ayurvedic treatment had a methotrexate placebo, the which received methotrexate and Ayurveda placebo. And the third group had a combination of both. So everybody was active. So there was no true no treatment group. And so everybody was responding. And that is why, the physicians couldn't judge. But I don't think this can be possible in all Ayurveda, trials. So this blinding and randomization was done cleverly by some protocols that we enforced. One is that everybody receives treatment, one form or the other, so that the physicians cannot make out a non-responding patient, because we know methotrexate works, we know Ayurveda also works, so they wouldn't be able to gauge. And the second thing is that blinding, when you look at a placebo in Ayurveda, we had used about 5-6 dosage forms: Kashayam, Arishtam, Gutika, Lehyam, Puchurnam, Ghridam, and also oil externally. Now you have to mimic all these oils and kashayams which have distinct smells and tastes. This was very, very challenging. So, at that time, Ayurveda was not so popular in Tamil Nadu, which is one reason our study succeeded, frankly. Now the placebos have improved. At that time, this was the first attempt. So what we did was we made food additives. We used food additives to make decoctions and arishtams, which may smell like wine or taste like, a decoction. We use bitter tasting additives and all that. And then we did a test to see if they had any active ingredients. Nothing. And if rheumatoid arthritis could get cured with these additives, then it's also good news. So, it's so easy. So we did that. And actually, I can also tell you that all the placebos were not successful. It was difficult to make a Ghridam placebo. It was difficult to make a Lehyam placebo. But 2 placebos were very successful, the Kashayam and the Arishtam. And since patients wouldn't know, because Ayurvedic treatment is a mix of many things, even if they don't get a Ghridam, they will not understand that they are not being given something. And second thing is we use colored bottles, so they wouldn't know. And the third thing is that people who had undergone Ayurvedic treatment in the last, we had a washout period. They shouldn't be very recently exposed to Ayurvedic treatment. Otherwise, they might recognize. And also, we had about 46 formulations, and it was not possible to create a placebo for each of them. So we had what we call a generic placebo, one Kashayam placebo. So whatever Kashayam is prescribed, we give this placebo. One Arishtam placebo, one Gutika placebo, one Churnam placebo. So even if we didn't give Lekhyam or Gridam to a patient on the placebo group, they wouldn't notice it because they already have to deal with a lot of things in the prescription. And we enforced very strict blinding procedures. So it's not easy to do a placebo. I wouldn't also recommend it always. But just to show as a proof of concept in a few diseases, if we can do some showcase, some few trials, this might make the skeptics more interested. And this is what happened in our study also, because we did it with this rigor. A lot of people questioned us saying there are no placebos in Ayurveda. And I told, we had criticism from both sides. So many Ayurveda people said there is no placebo in Ayurveda. You are disturbing the logic of Ayurveda. I said we are not disturbing anything. Ayurveda physician is treating as per his thinking only. We have complete freedom. Placebo, we don't accept, but they accept. If they accept, what is our headache? It's their headache. They are saying placebo is also having an effect. Now, according to modern medicine, they are testing us. They want the proof. It's not we who are creating the proof. So this is the thing is that, when we do studies, it's not for proof. It's for a dialogue. It's a dialogue between two systems. We didn't enter into this study to say that we are going to generate proof to show the efficacy of Ayurveda. Because as Ayurveda physicians, we had already seen the efficacy in our practice and over many, many years and decades. But the problem here is that we needed to communicate to a scientific community in a language that they would understand. And we took up that challenge and allowed them to formulate a design which would convince them that Ayurveda works. So that is how the placebo was. So this is where I think we need to really understand. If we are able to, communication means we become flexible, we become understanding. Now, the modern doctor in this study understood that Ayurveda has its own system. So they were willing to accommodate, so they also compromised. They said, let's not do the typical RCT. We can have an individualized treatment. At the end of the study, we made an analysis and we found that no single patient received the same prescription. There may have been common medications, but the combination was very much tailored. So this is a perfect case of an individualized treatment. And the treatments were changed over period. Because we have a concept, Amapachana. After that, we have to change the treatment. We go to the next stage, Srodha Shodhana or Shamana or Brahmana. So these stages, the treatment could be given and it could be tested using a very rigorous, design. And what our study, I really believe, does is unique, I think, is because it is based on this concept of feasibility dialogue rather than proof. Because this makes that whole perspective different. Otherwise, you are on the defense. Where is the proof? Do you work or not? This is not the spirit in which this study is done. We say, okay, you do things, you understand, it works for you. We are looking at it from a different angle. Can we have a dialogue and understand in each other's language? Can we look at each other's viewpoint? And that, I think, is the kind of research that is needed in Ayurveda, whether it's Ayurveda biology or integrative medicine. Integrative medicine at the clinical level and Ayurveda biology at the basic science level, this mindset has to come, that we are in a dialogue. We are trying to understand each other. It's not a question of proving one thing to the other. And then I think, we can move forward and a lot of things can happen.
We agree with you. I'll hand it over now to Vishnu. He'll continue with you.
Yeah. Sure, Dr. Megha. There is, thank you, Dr. Rammanohar, because there is some echo is coming up. So actually, I would like to, ask the next question from the very important point that you have discussed just now, the dialogue between Ayurveda and biology, and that is what is, really necessary. And we have given some example, like, this is one thing to communicate this, knowledge each other, etc. But from the perspective of basic science thinking, because we have taken that, Ayurveda biology as an example for basic science. So, are there any other, what I can say, the prospects for this dialogue? Will that dialogue will help us to take this basic understanding of this biology and life science forward? What is your thought? I would like to hear that.
Yeah, I think, if you look at Ayurveda and biology, I mean, they seem to be translations of the same word in two languages, like bios, life, and logos, study, ayus, life, and Veda, knowledge. So that itself shows that, they are just two perspectives of the same phenomenon. I mean, it's life, but we are looking at through different frames and lenses. So Ayurveda is one framework, and you look at life through one lens, and biology is another way of looking at it. And so here, that is why I say the dialogue is important, because we are just telling, when we look at life from this framework, this is what we see, this is what we understand. And the biologist looks at the same phenomenon from another viewpoint, and then he says, this is what we see. And now we have to build bridges. I don't think the question is that for everything that is mentioned in Ayurveda, we have to find a scientific reason. That's not the way it's going to work. Because, there are certain things which you can perhaps only experience or see when you wear the Ayurvedic lenses. You will not be able to see it from the biological viewpoint. Similarly, there are many things which from an Ayurvedic viewpoint, you may not be able to see. You need to wear the lens of a biologist. So Ayurveda biology, I think, is in that way complementary, that if they come together, we get a more comprehensive understanding of what life is. And there are many areas where we can see this. So, the concept of systems biology. I would say that Ayurveda is moving, like, even if there is reductionism in Ayurveda, it is from a holistic perspective. In biology, even if it tries to become holistic, it is still stuck in a basic reductionistic framework. So, you can go to systems biology, but it's actually like breaking the parts into whole and then trying to stitch them together. Whereas in Ayurveda, we see the whole system, as one complete and indivisible whole. So I think it is very important for humanity. We make the mistake by saying that biology is more progressed and Ayurveda is. So when you look at things in a linear way, one system seems to be more progressed than the other. But if you look at it as two paradigms, then they are parallel. I mean, there is no superiority of two systems. So I think we need to bring this together, and then Ayurveda can enrich modern biology, and modern biology can also enrich Ayurveda. And, a lot of new perspectives can come from Ayurvedic science about life itself. And there are many areas, like, many things that we are using in our daily life, even in our food, why certain food combinations we use, why in Ayurveda, we are able to get a lot of answers through modern biology also. Recently, I came to know, sometime back, there was a study on sambar, our very famous dish. Now, through a biological model, they were able to find out that sambar can prevent colon cancer. It has all the ingredients to prevent colon cancer. Now, this kind of a specific understanding, I mean, Ayurveda is looking at it from a broad biology regulatory framework. The Tridoshas are nothing but talking about the self-regulatory mechanism of the body. I mean, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So within that framework, when we create certain interventions tools, what are the effects that it is going to produce on the body? Sometimes modern biology enables us to explore that in very minute detail. And that is all the more enriching. How many of us knew that when we are mixing a cereal and a pulse, we are adding the essential amino acids, one which is missing in the other, and we get a complete, food. So many things. So this makes me more and more believe that it is not coincidence. There was another way of thinking, which also helped us to, come to very comprehensive, holistic understanding of how the human body functions. And now modern biology can unravel a lot of these mechanisms. And I think Professor M.S. Vaidya's attempt in that regard is quite a very important step in this direction, because he looked at these conceptual frameworks in Ayurveda and tried to see how modern biology can be applied. to demystify or get better understanding. So I think such scope is tremendous. I mean, there's so many areas in which we can work there. And recently, I had an experience in Parkinson's. In Parkinson's disease, we treat the gut, whereas the focus is always on the brain. In Ayurveda, even many clinicians from whom I learned, they used to say that it is like Udavarta, the Vayu moving from the gut into the head region. And it looked so funny and strange at that time. And I had some amazing experience with patients. And then when I discussed with biologists, and I was shocked to know that today the whole concept is now focused on Parkinson's originating from the gut. And that constipation could be a key symptom even 10 years before, Parkinson's starts. And that actually a misfolded protein, alpha-synuclein, is actually traveling from the gut through the vagus nerve into the brain, and then, causing the damage in the brain. And in Ayurveda, we do say that this mala actually moves in the Urdhva direction of Udavarta and reaches and this means Ayurvedic treatment is actually a bottom-up approach. We don't focus on the brain in the beginning. We are focusing on the gut. And there are also studies which showed that the microbiome, is very much involved in the changes in the gut that happens. And in animal studies, they have been able to prove that if you cut the vagus nerve, you can prevent this progression of Parkinson's. If you change the microbiome, it can change. So you can see two models, but even across these two paradigms, there are parallels. And I think this is what, and in modern medicine, they are focused too much on the molecule, whereas Ayurveda is able to visualize treatments like Vasti or, Agni correction, which you couldn't think at all from a biology framework. I mean, you would come up with only molecules, targeting specific molecules if you think from a biology framework. But when we have both, we can switch back and forth and get a more complete understanding, and maybe even add value and enhance the way Ayurvedic treatments are delivered, because when you can see both sides. So I think this is one example where I say, basic science can also help in our understanding of what we're doing in the clinical practice, if there is a proper dialogue and mutual understanding of concepts.
Yeah, thank you. Wonderful example. So, you are also a teacher beyond, scientist or a researcher. So, as a teacher, how do you see the, your experience as an Ayurveda biology teacher, if I can put it in that way?
I have basically always been fascinated by science. It is from my childhood. So, when I came to Ayurveda, I had a lot of difficulties. So that is why I think I've always tried to make bridges right from my student days. I wanted to become a medical doctor, but my father wanted me to study Ayurveda. And I had to even fight with him and even try to leave the course in between. And at one time, I thought I will disprove Ayurveda because I got so frustrated. And I must say that my attempts to actually disprove Ayurveda was what made me a greater believer, because many instances where I've tried to test it, I don't say that Ayurveda works everywhere. I mean, where it claims to work, whenever I've tested it, the results have been always positive. So I've come to believe that Ayurveda is testable, and that also we can have it. And this is what I try to communicate to my students also. I'm not teaching formally in a college. My teachings are mostly parallel, supplementary, because I've been basically a researcher. But I do get invited to teach, courses or give lectures and engage students of both Ayurveda and also modern science. So what I've always tried to relate it to my own journey, that, I feel that people can, relate to this dilemma in their mind. On the one hand, being exposed to modern science, and the other hand, getting exposed to Ayurveda. So how can we bring these two things together? And this is how I try to put it. The basic thing that you must understand if you want to bridge these two sciences together is that you must be able to think outside both Ayurveda and biology first. You must be able to look at Ayurveda and biology as a human being, and not look at it within. The basic problem that we have is a biologist tried to assimilate Ayurveda from the framework of biology, and an Ayurveda person tries to swallow biology into its framework. I always say first become a human being. This is the thing I realized during my own existential crisis. I said, let go science and let go Ayurveda. First, let me be somebody outside that. Because it is for me, for the human being, that both exist. So once I look at it as a human being, then I can have a much more, inclusive view. And this is what I try to encourage with my students, saying that, I was inspired by Adi Shankara. Adi Shankara is a philosopher, the Vedantin. But I was surprised at how he brought a nice synthesis between science and, spirituality. So he says, where is this problem? How do we solve this problem between scientific observation and spiritual realization? So he says nacha pratyaksha virodhe shrute praman. If a Vedic text contradicts direct perception, then throw it away. Your direct perception is what you must believe. So he says swavishaya shurani pramanani. Each pramana is the king in its own domain. You cannot topple down one pramana with the other. And this was a big lesson as a student. Where modern biology is strong, it is strong there. I mean, it is its domain. You cannot, negate it with a statement from some other science or some other scripture. And where Ayurveda is, where it is strong, I mean, it has its own validity. And in Ayurveda, I read from our text that Charaka is all, they are very humble. He says in anatomy, Atha param tarkyam. Beyond this, it's not pramana, it is debatable. So they distinguish the portions of Ayurveda which was debatable and which was actually, established. I think we should also have that humility. We have not studied our own texts very clearly. So everything, say, no, Ayurveda was such broad-minded that every knowledge from any source was accepted. I don't think if our acharyas were here, they would be against biology or any of this knowledge. But they would know still what was worth in Ayurveda. I think this is the framework that we need. So taking biology in its framework, so what I feel today is we need a meta framework. We are going into a stage of multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary pursuit of knowledge. And for such a pursuit, I mean, we are in a very unique stage of human evolution, I think, where even in modern science, we have multiple disciplines. And now we are getting introduced also to traditional, knowledge, which is also diverse. And it's very challenging to grapple because as a human being, changing from one paradigm to the other can be very unsettling. So I think the solution is to have a meta framework, that can bring all these knowledge systems together. And since, I'm also addressing, researchers and experts from the transdisciplinary university, I would say that this is what we expect from such a university, also a meta framework that can bring Ayurveda and biology together.
Great, that's a very important point. And as you rightly said, you wanted to be a doctor and you become a doctor and you are a physician and then you turn to be a researcher and you are also a teacher. So here my question is, how can we define a physician scientist, or who is a physician scientist, or who can be a physician scientist? Because there will be many people who are interested to become a physician scientist. So what is your advice to those people, youngsters maybe?
Yeah, I think it's my firm belief that a physician scientist was defined by Charaka himself. So Charaka said, if you are a clinician, if you treat a patient, and if the treatment becomes successful, and if you cannot rationalize or give a clear, justification of how the treatment worked, then you are a quack. That's what Charaka said. So you cannot build your clinical practice on just successes. You have to be critical of your own practice. I wouldn't say that as a physician, you have to go and work in a lab. Science can be done in the clinic also. And a physician scientist should be self-critical. This is what Charaka said. Charaka Samhita is one of the earliest textbooks to distinguish between what we call as chance effect and real effect of a treatment. So he used the terms Yadrucha Siddhi and Pratinamiki Siddhi. If you treat a patient and the patient gets cured, and if you don't know how it happened, then it's chance effects. You're not a physician. So you are a physician when you are able to do a tarka, give a yukti behind why that treatment worked. And this is the greatest contribution the Ayurveda clinicians can do today. And this is where Ayurveda is not coming forward. We have about, hundreds of thousands of Ayurveda clinicians. If all of them start contributing from their clinic experience of the cases, critically looking at their own failures and their own successes. And this is what Charaka says, a physician is not defined only by his successes. A physician is also defined by how he learns from his failures. And that is the spirit of a scientist. Being self-critical, looking at your own practice and sharing the richness of your clinical practice and your learnings, both the positive and the negative. That is how you can become a physician scientist. And I say this is Charaka's advice to a clinician. If you're treating, do this. And here, scientists could help. They could further unravel, the mechanism of how your drug worked. And then if you are doing this first, offering, then this whole process can become a big yajna. If the scientists and other experts come together from this great prasada that comes out of your own clinical practice, you can create, great applications and interventions that will become a blessing for the world. I think the silence of the Ayurveda physicians is the biggest curse for Ayurveda. We are keeping everything to ourselves. We are not sharing it. And, clinicians are, in single institutions. We must come out and we must share our knowledge, and then we become a true physician scientist.
Thank you. That's a very beautiful way of motivating those who are interested to become a physician scientist. So in that context, again, I would like to request you if you can share some incidents where, from your own experience, where you really felt that this, what I can say, different professionals from different areas, and the need of collaborating these people for the betterment of life science or understanding the problems in a better way.
When we set up our lab here, that is when there was a need to interact with people. We set up a modern lab, and we suddenly got a lot of instruments like LCMS, QTOF, ICP-MS, HPTLC, RT-PCR, and microbiology lab, cell line lab, and suddenly everything looked a bit confusing. And what do we do with this? I mean, how do we relate this to Ayurveda? And then I realized in one moment, this I think is very, very important, how we link, how we build the bridges between modern science, modern biology, and Ayurveda is very, very important. In a lot of places this happens, and we went through this dilemma also, that now are we just creating a lot of white elephants? If you ask somebody comes and asks us, we do have a fascinating lab, very expensive, all latest instruments, but what is going to happen out of it? How are we going to relate it to Ayurveda even? And then when we had a lot of dialogues, it stuck. Many of us, we got an insight, a very beautiful insight of how we must reorganize this lab from the perspective of Ayurveda. And this was a very striking moment for me. Of course, one example I told about Parkinson's earlier. So that is more in a clinical level. So now here I would like to relate it to even how we bring Ayurveda and modern, biology together. So the way our lab is organized is that, we have we have 5 labs actually. And these 5 labs represent the philosophy of the coming together of Ayurveda Ayurveda and biology. So on the one hand, we have the phytochemistry lab, because this is the whole concept in Ayurveda. Whatever gunas are there in the dravya, the same are there in the body. This is a very simple statement in Ayurveda. So whatever happens in the body is influenced by the dravyas from outside. And after all our discussions, we realized that it is possible to bring these two, streams of knowledge together. Is that even in modern medicine, the phytochemistry lab is like our dravya guna. We are studying the properties of plants and then how it acts on the body. And this was a very interesting understanding, that we have the microbiology lab, then we have the cell line lab, and then we have the genetics lab, and then we have the clinical lab. This is how our lab is organized. And this, I think, is a framework for Ayurveda biology, because we study the properties of plants through phytochemistry. And if you look at the human body, it is basically a microbiome. I mean, we are more bacteria than even our cells. So we are enveloped in that environment of microbiome. And this is what Charaka also mentioned, that Sahaja krimis, we are enveloped by innumerable microorganisms. Kejit Saukshmya Dadarshana, which means which you cannot see through your Mamsa Chakshus. This idea was there, so many thousands of years ago. And actually, our cells are actually within this envelope of, the microbes. And inside that cell is the genetic material. And this is what in Ayurveda we are understanding through the Tridosha framework also. I'm not going into the details of how we can exactly correlate this. So even inside the lab, we realize that through this whole concept of doing this modern biology analysis of Ayurveda, we are rediscovering this framework, the ancient framework of how a drug acts on the human body. I mean, this is what we are understanding through another paradigm. Another situation where we were talking about the mind-body continuum, and today we have this new modern concept of PNEI axis. And again, this was how to create a framework where we can bring these two systems together. And in modern medicine, they are talking about the PNEI axis, psycho, neuro, endocrino, immunological axis. And then in one moment, I mean, when we were working on this whole concept of how there's a crosstalk between the body and the mind, this insight emerged that this is exactly the model of the human body in Ayurveda, the Manas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. This is what has been rediscovered as the PNEI axis. I'm not saying they are exact, So when there is an open dialogue and discussion between, people representing multiple disciplines, in my experience, we are able to create a framework where, we can bring these two systems together. And I think that is the foundational step that we need to do before going into working on, very specific projects or very specific research questions.
Certainly, that's very important, because it's basically taking us from lab to clinic and beyond that, so that we are actually interacting with the nature, so that PNAI will really help to understand the body in a much better way, and body and the physiology and the biology of the system. So one other question what I would like to ask is, which area of Ayurveda is your personal favorite from a research perspective, and why it is favorite?
Actually, the whole of Ayurveda is my favorite, because in Charaka Samhita it is said Jagraha Nikhile Nadavu, means when Indra got this knowledge of Ayurveda, he got it in one stroke. So it is all or none principle. Either you love Ayurveda completely or you don't love it at all. You cannot love Ayurveda in bits and pieces. But having said that, some of the areas that have really attracted me, because I found that, they have a lot of scope in bringing new paradigms. One is, of course, neurology and neurobiology. Because, I've always been fascinated about the concept of Vata in Ayurveda, and how Vata is, not focused in the brain at all. Until I came to this modern concept of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is an amazing phenomenon that, the nervous system has tremendous scope to reorganize itself, repair itself. So the brain that repairs it, so this is a book that once I read, and then it transported me back to the Ayurvedic text, because when I was a student of Ayurveda, I was reading a chapter on Vata Vyadhi, and suddenly the Acharya breaks into a prayer. Vata, oh Vata, you are so great. You are the Vishnu, you are Brahma. And I at that time I was very irritated. I thought, my God, my life is gone. What is this? I'm opening a book on medicine, and here is all rubbish, prayers. But many years later, when I read about neuroplasticity, I understood why our acharyas were looking at Vata like this. Because Vata is the power of self-regeneration, of self-organization. And that is why the acharyas, when Vata Vyadhi, neurological diseases, they were simply saying that, if you can awaken Vata, then the body can heal itself. And this was neuroplasticity being explained, in the language of Ayurveda. So I think in neurobiology has been a fascinating area of my interest. Another area is, of course, rheumatological conditions, because I also worked on it. And from there, I came to understand about autoimmunity and also the concept of AMA and how, AMA and autoimmunity are very much interrelated. So this was another area, where it would be possible for us to actually, demonstrate how the Ayurvedic modeling of the body can give new insights even to modern immunological medicine, modern neurobiology. And for that matter, also many other areas like NCDs is another area. So I can say my interest here is because these are relevant today, not because I like it more than any other part of Ayurveda. So, other area where I'm working on right now is also in the Ayurvedic concept of, NCDs or non-communicable diseases, because I believe this idea, today we have 4 major NCDs, like heart disease, number 1 killer, and cancer. Third killer, of course, is the medical error or doctor himself. And then we have, other diseases like diabetes. I came to know that 70% of today's healthcare burden is on NCDs. And if Ayurvedic treatments like Panchakarma and Rasayana are introduced even in a preventive way, we could really prevent this epidemic. So the areas that I got interested in Ayurveda are those areas where I feel that if we bring it out into, public health domain, we can benefit the society most. And I think that should be the responsibility. We must love Ayurveda because it is one. You cannot just love it in parts. I cannot say I like the hand of Ayurveda or the face of Ayurveda. I love Ayurveda as a whole because it is one indivisible. That is the beauty. It gives you the total perspective on life. But then you must focus on those aspects of Ayurveda using which we can help and benefit society most. Bring a new perspective, fill in current gaps of knowledge.
Yes, certainly that I completely agree that you cannot, love part of Ayurveda. We have to really, love the entire Ayurveda as a science. And also, as you rightly did in your landmark paper of, rheumatoid arthritis, we need to understand this Ayurveda and we need to come up with appropriate methodologies that can be, designed to understand this science rather than putting this into the existing methodologies and, reducing into that whatever that is available. So we cannot design the question based on the available methodology, rather than we have to design the methodologies to answer that question. We are almost, came to an end of this session. Actually, we had certain questions from the audience, but most of these questions you have answered during your experience that you have shared with us. So I don't think we need to take those questions separately. And also, since we have reached to the end of this 1 hour session, so I would like to thank you, Dr. Rammanohar, for your time and sharing your experience with us. And I'm sure all the audience, those who have attended this and those who are going to see this video, will definitely benefit. And I'm sure students who will be looking for this kind of topics like integrating Ayurveda and biology will definitely get inspired from these experiences. So once again, thank you very much, sir, for your time.
Thank you very much. It was an honor and pleasure to participate. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you.